Something extraordinary is happening in the global financial system right now. Central banks around the world are quietly abandoning the US dollar at a pace not seen since World War II. In 2024 alone, central banks purchased over 1,000 tons of gold. That's the third consecutive year they've bought more than 1,000 tons. To put this in perspective, the average annual purchases between 2010 and 2021 were just 473 tons. They've more than doubled their buying. This isn't gradual diversification. This is systematic replacement of dollar reserves with physical gold on a scale that suggests they know something catastrophic is coming. The National Bank of Poland just pushed its gold reserves to 21% of total holdings. China hasn't missed a single month of gold buying in almost a year, while quietly unloading U.S. Treasuries. Even countries that have been staunch U.S. allies for decades are stacking bullion like the dollar is already yesterday's news. Here's the part nobody's talking about on television. In 2024 alone, central banks scooped up 1,045 tons of physical gold. That's the third year in a row they crossed 1,000 tons. From 2010 to 2021, the annual average was only 473 tons. They didn't just double their pace, they tripled it and kept the pedal down. Annual mine supply is roughly 3,000 tons. That means 1 out of every 3 ounces pulled out of the ground is now disappearing straight into government vaults. China's moves are surgical. Between late 2013 and mid-2025, they slashed Treasury holdings from $1.317 trillion to $730 billion, a 45% cut, while piling gold into their official reserves. Public numbers showed 2,330 tons worth about $283 billion, but credible intelligence estimates put the real stash north of 5,000 tons. Same playbook, different reporting line. They're swapping paper promises for metal they can touch. Poland is the loudest example. They were the single biggest official buyer in 2024, adding 90 tons to hit 448 tons total. Then in the first quarter of 2025, they tacked on another 49 tons, bringing the pile to 497 tons, 21% of their entire reserve portfolio. Governor Adam Glapinski didn't whisper this in a back room. He said it on camera. Gold equals financial security and independence. Translation, we see the cliff and we're not walking blind. This isn't a handful of rogue nations. It's a global wave. Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, parts of Africa, every region is running the same trade. Shrink dollar exposure, max out physical gold, fly it home, lock it underground. Diversification is what you call it when you move 2% around. This is a replacement. The World Gold Council asked nearly 60 central banks why they're doing it. The polite answers were the usual: long-term store of value, inflation hedge, portfolio diversifier. The real answer was buried deeper in the survey: fear of sanctions and fear that the major reserve currencies are quietly dying. Michael Burry put it best: when the people who own the most of something start selling it faster than it's being created, you don't ask questions, you just watch where they're running and run faster. Here's what keeps me up at night, and it should scare every American who still thinks the dollar is forever. The US dollar's slice of global central bank reserves has crashed to 57.4%, the lowest since 1994. Back in 2015, it sat at 66%. That's 8.6 points gone in 10 years. Keep that slope and the dollar drops below 50% by 2034. Except the pace is accelerating, not cruising. Central banks aren't waiting for some polite 2034 retirement party. They're moving today like the clock already reads 2027. Foreign ownership of U.S. Treasuries collapsed from over 50% during the crisis to roughly 30% in early 2025. The biggest buyers of the last 40 years are now net sellers. Think about that. The people who used to fund America's deficits are quietly walking away from the table. Trillions in new debt roll in every year. If the historic lenders are dumping, who is exactly supposed to step up and absorb it? Meanwhile, the gold side of the ledger is screaming the opposite message. At the end of 2024, gold made up only 19% of total central bank reserves. The post-Bretton Woods average was 29%. The historical peak was 70%. That gap is the runway. If they simply crawl back to the old 29% average, gold demand jumps more than 50%. If they ever decide to get serious and push toward historical norms, demand triples from here. Michael Burry summed it up in one sentence: when the people who own the most of something start selling it faster than it's being created, you don't debate the trend, you price the consequence. The day the West froze $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves wasn't just a sanction. It was the loudest alarm clock in modern financial history. In one afternoon, every central banker on Earth realized their dollar piles could be erased with a signature, not a market crash, just a political phone call. Decades of savings gone because someone in Washington or Brussels got upset. That single event flipped the switch. Gold stopped being nice to have and became the only asset on the planet that no foreign power can freeze, seize, or delete with a keystroke. The data since then is brutal. 5 of the 10 biggest one-year gold buying surges since 1999 happened to countries that were under sanctions or had just come off them. The correlation isn't subtle. When the dollar becomes a weapon, nations reach for the one thing that can't be weaponized back. Now even countries with zero sanctions today are acting like they expect them tomorrow. They're not buying paper gold, not ETFs, not futures. They're demanding actual bars. Germany spent years quietly flying plane loads home from New York and London to Frankfurt. Netherlands, Austria, Belgium, same playbook. They want it on their soil, in their vaults, behind their locks. Because when the music stops, paper promises turn into confetti, and only metal you can touch still counts. They're building fortress-grade underground storage that looks less like bank vaults and more like doomsday bunkers. This isn't about yield. This is about having something usable when the entire system has to be rebuilt from the ashes. Michael Burry said it plainly: the moment a reserve currency can be confiscated without a trial is the moment every rational actor stops treating it like a reserve and starts treating it like a liability. The numbers all crash together around 2027, and once you see the math, you can't unsee it. Global growth is limping along at 2.5% for the entire decade, the weakest stretch since the 1960s. U.S. debt to GDP has gone from 35% in 1970 to 124% today. Interest alone is already eating a bigger and bigger slice of every tax dollar collected. Run those lines forward on a spreadsheet for 5 more minutes and the cells turn red. The trajectory literally stops making sense. Something has to break. Central banks aren't hoping for a soft landing. They know the only realistic exit is to inflate the debt away. And they know that once that starts, it doesn't stop at 5 or 10%. They're positioning for full system reset, not polite inflation. In that world, gold isn't a hedge anymore. It's the only thing left standing when the ledger gets wiped clean. Even the buttoned-up suits at JP Morgan are out with it now. $3,675 by the end of 2025, $4,000 by mid-2026, and that's their base case. They're citing the exact same drivers everyone else is watching: structural demand, geopolitics, and central banks who won't stop buying. Do the reserve math yourself. Total global monetary reserves sit around $15 trillion. Push gold back to a modest 25% weighting, and you need multiples of today's physical supply at today's price. Either the price explodes to balance the equation, or there simply isn't enough metal to go around. Central banks figured this out years ago, so they're front-running the shortage while the rest of the world is still arguing about inflation being transitory. 2027 is when every major pressure point hits the wall at once. Debt service costs go vertical, growth stays anemic, geopolitics splinters what's left of cooperation, and dollar holdings hit the minimum any central bank is willing to tolerate. That's not a forecast, that's just where the trend lines collide. Michael Burry nailed it. When the interest on the debt exceeds the growth of the economy that has to pay it, the game is already over. Everyone left in the room is just negotiating the size of their loss. Chapter 5. The Reset Playbook: How History Rhymes and Who Wins. The mechanics of what's coming in 2027 become clearer when you examine how previous monetary resets actually unfolded. This isn't the first time the global financial system has faced mathematical impossibility. It's not the first time central banks have abandoned a reserve currency. And it's not the first time gold has returned as the foundation during system collapse. The pattern is documented, the timeline is predictable, and the outcome is inevitable once certain thresholds are crossed. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window because the mathematics became impossible. Foreign central banks were demanding gold for dollars at the official rate of $35 per ounce. But the U.S. had printed far more dollars than they had gold to back them. The choice was simple: honor the gold conversion and deplete U.S. gold reserves completely, or break the promise and end dollar convertibility. Nixon chose system preservation over currency credibility. The Bretton Woods system died overnight.